The Jaguar I-Pace has quickly become one of the most controversial and also interesting EVs to come out. It comes from a brand that just recently flipped the script, opting in for a more luxury boutique sort of setup, essentially obliterating their great automotive heritage. But does this shift signal progress or a massive misstep? And where does the I-Pace fit in all of this? Well, my name is John with Blackbird Productions, and today I'm here to find that out. Today, I'll be diving into a review of this Jaguar I-Pace HSE R Dynamic. And we'll explore if this EV is a bright spot in Jaguar's evolved history or something that's best kept overlooked. So think of this as my showcase or miniature review of one of the most unique electric crossovers that just got discontinued. This I-Pace marks Jaguar's first and last, then first venture into EVs. Okay. Confusion aside, at its core, this car is unmistakably a Jaguar Land Rover product. When you buy a British car like this, you're not only buying the sleek design and luxurious feel, you're also signing up for some of those classic British quirks as well. And this I-Pace has plenty of those. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of what makes this car a bit of a charming mystery, let's talk about the power. This particular I-Pace is Jaguar's top-tier trim, the HSE R Dynamic, and it packs a punch. This I-Pace is pushing an impressive 394 horsepower and 512 pound-feet of torque. And during my time with this car, the torque particularly was pretty touchy, even in the car's eco driving mode, which took some time to get used to. Handling in the I-Pace is remarkably composed. Jaguar markets this car as a sporty crossover SUV, but Car and Driver calls it more of a quasi-crossover, and I kind of like their terminology better. To me, however, it feels more like a lowered SUV, paired with the handling of a car that quite frankly shouldn't even exist. So what do I mean by that? Well, I'm convinced there's a little wizard hidden somewhere in the wheel wells working magic to give this car the level of handling I experienced while driving it. Seriously, this car has no business being as nimble as it is. At nearly 5 tons, you'd expect it to feel sluggish or heavy through the corners, but somehow Jaguar has defied all expectations here. The I-Pace glides through corners with ease and agility that makes you forget you're driving a car of this size and weight. It's almost like it rewrites the rules of physics, and that's pretty cool. The exterior of the I-Pace is undeniably unique and distinctive, especially in this elegant color. I feel like this sleek design really does stand out. And I love how the rear gently slopes into those signature Jaguar taillights. Gotta love it. It's a look that's quite refined. These 22-inch wheels wrapped in Pirelli P0s are another standout feature. These wheels are exclusive to the I-Pace and come with carbon fiber inserts that add a bold and dynamic touch to the overall package. But they're not just functional, they improve the visual appeal and hint at the car's performance-oriented aesthetic. I'll say that one thing that constantly surprises me every time I get into this car is just how low it sits for a sporty crossover SUV. It gives the I-Pace a more grounded sports car-like feel while maintaining its SUV proportions. Thankfully, this isn't much of an issue thanks to the handy suspension lift system. Onto the interior. I'll say the interior is pretty standard Jaguar Land Rover in here, albeit with a touch of sophistication and sportiness, particularly in the leather stitching and these red leather seats, which is a couple shades darker than the traditional red leather that I find in some other cars. The interior is also pretty spacious in here, offering plenty of room for passengers in both the front and the rear. It truly feels like an SUV inside here. with generous headroom and legroom that ensures comfort for everyone, regardless of where they're seated. Storage in the I-Pace is also impressively SUV-like, offering plenty of practicality to match its sleek design. In the back, you'll find a spacious trunk with the option to fold down the rear seats for even more cargo space. And additionally, you also get extra room to put items under the trunk floor, which is a feature that's quickly become a staple in many EVs, providing a convenient spot for smaller items or just keeping things organized. Up front, the I-Pace also offers a front trunk, which is great for storing essentials like charging cables, an emergency tire kit, or maybe even a small bag. I'll say since the car doesn't come with a spare tire particularly, which has also become a common trend among modern vehicles and especially EVs, the tire repair kit might also be something you would want in this car. So given this car has a front trunk, I think that would be a pretty useful spot to put something like that in. Technology is also pretty solid in the I-Pace. You're getting a couple of screens in here, and while I won't be going into detail on each individual screen, I will say collectively they are adequate in their function and are also equally responsive and straightforward to use. However, compared to something like a Model Y in terms of infotainment, this is primitive, which isn't the worst thing in the world, given that Jaguar is likely working on newer, more refined infotainment systems for the new fleet of EVs that they've been talking about along with this rebranding. So let's talk about cons. And I have a lot to say in this section, but I'm going to keep it brief with 3 points. The first big one being the LG battery pack and the reliability surrounding these particular battery packs. For the earlier I-Pace models, particularly for early 2022, the battery modules were known for overheating. Jaguar attempted to remedy the issue through a software patch which could detect if each individual battery was overheating or not. And if the software detected this, the car would be completely inoperable, which then required a Jaguar service visit. From there, Jaguar would replace the failed module and you'd be on your merry way, of course. But the problem was Jaguar had so much demand for replacing modules that they simply couldn't keep up with the demand, and eventually parts had to go on backorder. This left many customers justifiably upset, so Jaguar decided to start doing these buybacks on the I-Pace. Since then, the battery issue has been fixed for newer I-Pace models, and after about 7 months in the shop, this owner of the I-Pace I'm actually reviewing today said that he hasn't had any issues with it since then. And I'll say I've kind of seen all of the phases within this story just because this particular owner has been in and out of 3 or 4 different rental cars from Jaguar, which their service is pretty good. I will say that they're very accommodating when it comes to these types of things, but it was still just pretty unfortunate that this owner had to go through that sort of thing with his car. But nonetheless, the issue has been fixed, at least for now. We don't know what the long-term reliability would be like on a battery like this, especially since Jaguar actually discontinued this car just recently. Another thing this owner told me is that the car actually went into service for rotting seals, particularly around the windshield and doors. And at that time, the car had less than 3,000 miles on it, and it was also garage kept. So I'm not particularly sure how these seals are rotting away so quickly, but thankfully they are replaced under warranty. And speaking of rotting seals, I was actually looking at some old TVRs just the other day, and that was also an issue on those cars, and those cars were actually from the 90s. So I feel like this is a British quirk type of thing to look out for when you're wanting to purchase a car like this. My last con revolves around both the charging and also the battery technology in this car. So, if you didn't know, this car only gets 234 miles of range, which places it below the industry average for EVs, or where EVs should be in terms of range, which is around 300 miles. The other thing is the charging technology on board with this car is pretty dated, and 2 things come to mind. The first is this car is actually locked off from the Tesla charging network, so you can't use supercharging and you can't use that fancy level 3 or beyond charging, depending on, when you watch this video, we might be in level 5 charging. But anyway, you can't use that new fancy tech when charging this car. Instead, you're restricted to either home charging or some of those other third-party chargers like EV America and some of those other ones. Which, if your experience is as good as mine with EV America, and I say that sarcastically, then you probably want to stay away from those. But I will say, although the car is below that 300-mile mark in terms of range and the charging technology is dated, if you have sufficient home charging and a safe place to keep this car out of the elements preferably, then I don't think charging should be a problem with this particular car. The range estimate is also nothing to really worry about with this particular car, just because it's very, very efficient. And I'll say that the owners are actually real estate agents, so they legitimately have to drive all around the DFW area. And if you know DFW, you know how sparse it is when it comes to just getting to where you're going. And they have no problem going from A to B to Z with this car. So that is something worth pointing out. All right, now it's time for the rapid fire round, and that includes my favorite feature, something I'd change, and advice for an aspiring owner. All right, favorite feature. My favorite feature by far in this interior is the quality of the screens, particularly on the climate dials. Not a lot of automakers do this. I know BMW does it in some of their cars, but essentially what they've done is they've put a graphic of your climate on the dial, and it's actually a screen, and it's very, very high quality. I love that. Something I'd change is definitely the number of areas in which Jaguar clearly cheaped out in this car, two of which come to mind. First one being the silver trim, and second being the doors. For the silver trim, it just feels cheap. It's clearly not real metal. It's some sort of plastic alloy that they're using, and it's littered throughout the interior, along with some other trim that feels the same way. The doors also feel similar, particularly the door handles. I'll say I do get the ick when I try to reach for the door handle and open it, just because it feels like plastic. I'm not sure if it's plastic for sure, but I'll say I'm about 80% sure that it's some sort of hard plastic that they're using for the door handles, which I feel like is a Jaguar Land Rover type of thing, because I feel like every car that they've made has these kind of doors, except obviously for their super, super luxury high-end Range Rover products. And I feel like for a car that is between $70,000 and $80,000, this is unacceptable. And when you deal with materials like this in a $70,000 to $80,000 car, a luxury $70,000 to $80,000 car, you definitely are smacked back into reality with a car of this status. My advice for future owners consists of a couple things. The first is ensure you have a detailed history of the car if you're buying it used, to ensure any recalls or battery issues were addressed. The second thing is request a battery health report. That is if you're buying used. And then the last thing is please, please, please do not buy this car brand new. On Jaguar's site, as of making this video, they market this car as a $72,000 car. And I'm sure it's going to go up to $80,000 with taxes and fees. And quite frankly, I just don't think this is an $80,000 car. Your money would be best spent elsewhere. Instead, consider buying used. There's lots of great examples that are for sale currently today. But of course, just make sure you do your research and also do your due diligence when shopping around for a car like this. So overall, I think this car is pretty cool. I think Jaguar discontinued a platform that clearly could have gotten better over time. And one can only hope that they use some remnants of this platform with their new fleets of EVs, because it's pretty solid, honestly. And although it's not perfect, I think a family would adore this SUV. Although long-term, just like any EV, you have to do your research and you have to do your due diligence when you're looking for a car, a British car of this stature. So that is my review of the I-Pace. If you enjoyed it, definitely feel free to leave a like and consider subscribing. I make new car reviews like these every month, and I'd love to have your support. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. This has been John with Blackbird Productions, and I'll see you in the next review.